I invite your attention to the book of Ecclesiastes. For those who may be still reading from this old-fashioned way with the Bible, I'll give you time to find it. Ecclesiastes. The chapter is number 1. And I'll be reading from the New King James Version. So, Ecclesiastes, chapter number 1. I'll read verse 1 and number 2. And it reads, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Barney, for reading that. I often try to keep my scriptures short, that I have people read. Next time I'll give you the two chapters instead of 2 verses that I'm going to cover here, or at least when I say cover, guys, I'm trying to keep this 20-25 minutes. You'll get the, maybe not the Reader's Digest version, but something between that and the long version. But it is good to be here with you all this morning. Well, just as my lesson disappears from my computer. Steve has left a curse here. Steve, if you're listening, as we're recording this. Give me 1 second. Okay, my apologies for that. The search for meaning in this life, for what truly matters in this world, it's a quest that has filled countless books, has consumed countless lives, will continue as it's the search for a PowerPoint that will cooperate is frustrating to me right now. But anyway, the search for meaning in this life. It's a quest that was consumed countless lives and continue to do so. It can seem a very daunting task, such as trying to get your computer to work, especially against the backdrop of an existence in a world which seems at times to be so void of ultimate meaning. Why are we here? What is the purpose of it all? Even when we think we have good answers to these questions, some unforeseen event, some inexplicable tragedy occurs, shatters our conceptions. It has us questioning things all over again, searching to make sense of so much senselessness. And that is where we find the author of our text this morning, the author of Ecclesiastes, searching for meaning. What is it that gives us lasting purpose? So in this brief survey of the first 2 chapters of the book, I want to take you on this fascinating, if somewhat depressing, journey that the author takes through different areas of everyday life, trying to find meaning in a world that more and more presents itself to us as meaningless, before finally discovering true lasting meaning and purpose lies beyond ourselves, beyond the things that we do, and ultimately comes from God Himself. But the first 11 verses of chapter 1 serve as one half of kind of a framework of the book. And then the last 6 verses of the book, chapter 12, verses 9 through 14, that serves as the second half. Everything else is kind of sandwiched in between those 2 passages. In verse 1, chapter 1, we're introduced to a character known as, in the Hebrew, it is Kohelet. It's usually translated in English as the teacher. he is said to be, in the text, he is said to be a son of David and a king in Jerusalem. Is this, in fact, Solomon? Solomon, the author of Ecclesiastes. Most scholars today would say no, for a variety of reasons having to do with language that's used, other internal factors in the text. If not Solomon, then who? Who is this Kohelet? It's the person who wrote the framing of the book, the first few verses and the last verses, where he refers to the teacher in the third person. Is that the same person who wrote the rest of the book, in which he refers to himself as the teacher in the first person? I'm sorry to disappoint, but I do not have any concrete answers either way for that question. And I do not think the way the book is written requires that we say one way or the other. It doesn't require a single author necessarily, or it doesn't require multiple authors or redactors, people who are redacting editing the text. Ultimately, the authorship question is one of somewhat limited significance. It does not really change much about what is actually written. We have the text as it is. We deal with the text kind of as it is. I myself am of the mind to say that the author is probably one person writing in two voices. One in the framework passages and another in the main body of the book. In the latter of those, he gives us his particular catalog of wisdom, and in the former, in the framework passages, he gives us commentary to a degree on that wisdom, points us to a greater meaning, especially in the very end. I'm not married to that view. Many folks with very high views of Scripture have debated and disagreed about these things for many years, and I'm okay with kind of just existing in the tension of not knowing for certain and trying to just understand the passage regardless of who exactly wrote it. But we have this teacher, whoever he is, this man being put forth as someone of exceptional wisdom, given this kind of allusion to Solomon, king in Jerusalem, son of David. It's never mentioned by name as Solomon in the entire book, but that's kind of the allusion that's given. What words, then, does this wise man have for us? Meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. On the list of most positive introductions, this certainly falls a bit short. This word that is used frequently here and frequently elsewhere throughout the book is this Hebrew word hevel. This can be a tricky word to translate. It most literally means vapor or breath. And thus you can get this idea of something being impermanent or transitory, being here one minute, gone the next. The NIV translation of meaningless is a good translation in some places, maybe not as good a translation in some other places. One possibility, or one translation, one meaning that I think can be quite good is that of hevel, meaning something closer to absurd, in the sense of, or the idea being that existence itself is largely one great injustice. That there is a way that things ought to be that is constantly undermined, constantly undone by what actually happens. The fact of the matter is that each of these definitions, or each of these meanings, has some truth to it and may make more sense depending on the context in which the word is found. Whichever word we use, the connotation is almost always quite negative. And why should it not be, given what the teacher is saying here? What do people gain from all of their labors at which they toil under the sun? The implied answer is, of course, nothing. What could possibly be gained in a world that is so unchanging, seemingly never changes? The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where streams come from, there they return again. And so on, and so on, and so on. Humans, and likewise the creation in which they find themselves, are subject to the frustration of this aimless monotony. There is nothing new under the sun. Now, under the sun, there is a particular phrase that Ecclesiastes carries the meaning something along the lines of observable reality. The teacher is making remarks simply about what he sees, without any reference or consideration of anything beyond that, beyond what is just observable. In this instance, life under the sun is a life where, generally speaking, nothing ever really changes, and memory and legacy are largely lost to the ever-marching passage of time. It's a rather bleak assessment. And without getting too far ahead of myself, the teacher does not necessarily want anyone to stay perpetually mired in this more pessimistic worldview. It's precisely because this bleak outlook exists that we who believe in something greater, which gives ultimate meaning, we have hope. In a world that is seemingly void of anything new, we believe precisely that something new has in fact come, has happened, has made a real difference, and continues to make a real difference. The world that the teacher describes is what makes the gospel necessary, and what makes it good news. But as I said, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. For now, we remain here with the teacher, who finally gets to speak for himself, starting in verse 12, about this great undertaking of trying to understand the world and the search for real meaning. And over this long discourse, he tries to discover meaning through three different avenues: acquisition of knowledge and wisdom, the enjoyment of pleasures, and the toiling of labor to accumulate wealth and possessions. Surely, one of these fundamental aspects of life can offer true meaning in and of themselves. At least that's the goal, to see if that's what we can find out. So the teacher seeks to look more deeply into each one of these, to test them, to see what answers they might provide. He starts in verse 12 through 18 of chapter 1 with wisdom and knowledge. Certainly, the idea that the accumulation of knowledge or the application of that knowledge towards making wise decisions being a proper end in and of itself, it's not a new idea. Greek philosophers such as Plato would certainly see wisdom as the highest of callings that a person could possibly answer to. Speaking as one who went to school for, shall we say, an extended period of time and acquired several degrees, the acquisition of knowledge and wisdom for its own sake has a certain appeal to it. As humans, we have an innate desire to know things, to solve problems. It makes sense that we would highly value these attributes. At the same time, we also understand that the more we acquire knowledge, the more we understand how little we actually know. It can be very frustrating. It can be very deflating at times to seek answers only to find that they are beyond our grasp. And that is where our previous mention of hevel as containing a meaning like absurd, that's where that kind of comes into play. The seeking of wisdom and knowledge in the world that so often seems to go against our notions of order and justice and rationality often becomes a very frustrating exercise. And so we can understand, even sympathize, I think, with the teacher's words in verse 18 where he says, with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Now I should say before moving on, that the teacher is not saying that these things, wisdom, pleasure, and toil, are inherently bad. He's not saying that. Not saying that, or that they are to be avoided, as though he thinks it's better or preferable to be a fool, or an ascetic, or a sluggard. These things are not inherently bad. They are inherently hevel. They are meaningless, absurd, vanity, and chasing after the wind, if they are not, or if they are engaged in for their own sake, apart from God. Again, I do not want to get too far ahead of myself. But I also I just don't want to give the wrong impression about what the teacher is saying. The issue is not to reject these things, but to utilize them properly, in the proper context, proper understanding. Take pleasures, for example. Beginning of chapter 2, the teacher, he is still on this search. He couldn't find meaning in wisdom and knowledge and accumulation of facts. He's still on this search in this crazy world, trying to find meaning. And he decides to see if there could be any meaning found in the partaking of various kinds of pleasures. Now, to some ears, I imagine that probably sounds like all of the teachers just giving himself over to hedonism or debauchery, simply indulging in any and all pleasures without regards to limits, consequences, or what effect it has on his conscience. But on the contrary, he actually insists in verse 3 that his mind was, quote, still guiding me with wisdom. Far too often in life, pleasure does become an end in itself for people. They're perpetually seeking gratification. They go to whatever lengths they need to go to get it. Eventually, what satisfied them before does not suffice any longer, and so they have to escalate to achieve that same result. And before long, it's no longer a matter of people enjoying the good things that God provides, but rather they have become slaves, essentially, to whatever they have to do, whatever can give the most temporary pleasure, or is far too often the case, whatever can dull the pain in their lives. And the teacher knows that such an overindulgence is not going to provide any lasting meaning, and so his indulgence is a careful and a rational one. He says he does so with a clear mind, with a clear purpose. Given the bleak outlook on life from chapter 1, can he find greater meaning in the consumption of wine and the revelry that goes along with it? Man is, after all, a social creature by nature. Perhaps good food and drink in the company of one's closest companions, perhaps that can help to make some sense of the apparent senselessness of life and provide some meaning where none seemed to exist before. Perhaps that could be the case. But why stop at wine and revelry, even? Surely there are other pleasures. As he goes on to say, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks, planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. He kept on doing more and more, adding more and more accomplishments and possessions. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. So again, after bringing that caveat, he is indulging in pleasures, but doing so with his wisdom, his conscience still intact. Seemingly lived the dream of most everyone who has ever lived, this idea of amassing as many things as humanly possible while somehow still maintaining a modicum of rationality, of self-control, all for a greater purpose. Could he find meaning in pleasure? Well, if we've been paying attention up to this point, the answer should probably not be too surprising. As he says, yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Not even the self-aware and self-controlled indulgence and pleasures could provide any lasting meaning. A temporary satisfaction, perhaps, but not lasting meaning. After all, these things are just as fleeting as anything else. They are pebble. They are fleeting and temporary and doomed to vanish, just like a vapor. These things can be appreciated for what they are, but they left no lasting mark. They don't provide any greater meaning. So meaning is not to be found, then, in pleasures, at least not for their own sake. Nor, as we saw earlier, is it found in wisdom for its own sake. But just in case we forgot that, the teacher comes back to that idea one more time. Some extra explanation. He kind of has 2 points here about wisdom that he makes. The first is, wisdom's good. He endorses wisdom as opposed to, because if you're not going to be wise, then what are you going to be? I guess a fool. So he endorses wisdom as opposed to foolishness. I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fools walks around in darkness. Wisdom illuminates and allows the wise to see where they're going, whereas folly dulls the senses, prevents the fool from properly engaging with the world. Now, on that basis alone, wisdom is preferable to folly. But the second point is that even though it is preferable to live with wisdom rather than live with folly, unfortunately, the same fate sadly takes them both. Wisdom doesn't make you immoral. It just means that your paths during this short, meaningless life are brighter. All the wisdom in the world cannot prevent the inevitable. As he says, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Those who seek ultimate meaning then and long-lasting significance through wisdom end up really only finding frustration. And so wisdom, again, does not give the teacher what he is seeking. And we start to get to the point where these continual failures to find meaning are starting to take their toll. He says there, so I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, chasing after the wind. But still, perhaps, there was hope in one final test. Could he find meaning in his work? I can say for myself personally that I understand the merit of this perspective. Work can give a person purpose and direction. It can give them a feeling that what they do means something beyond themselves. It's no surprise that the teacher would at least hypothesize that work could be something that holds greater meaning for humans. Unfortunately, his ultimate conclusion is the same as his previous attempts. This is all meaningless. This is all chasing after the wind, and so on and so forth. Trying to find greater meaning in work was ultimately heaven. It was absurd. It was meaningless. The reasons, very similar to the reasons he just gave about wisdom. Death makes a mockery of it. All that we toil for will eventually outlast us. And others will control what we have accumulated with no guarantee that they will use it wisely. And that's not an uncommon tragic tale, of course. The story of the man who works hard and long hours all of his life to provide for his family or to save up for the future, or maybe just for posterity to have accomplishments that he can point to and say, hey, look at this thing I've done. All of those things, only to die unexpectedly and lose everything that they had built. Again, work is not inherently bad. Wisdom is not inherently bad. Pleasure is not inherently bad. The value, though, has to be tempered with the knowledge that it cannot ultimately give us the meaning that we seek. We don't find our identity and our meaning in those things. We cannot control them as much as we might want to convince ourselves otherwise. Life is just too chaotic for that. So none of these things, wisdom, the pleasure, the work, none of these things provide the teacher with the greater meaning that he's seeking. So where then can he find it? And the answer comes in verse 24. The answer lies in who has been largely absent from this text up until now. That is, it lies with God. God has not shown up too much in the text up to this point. But here he shows up. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? These things previously mentioned, wisdom, pleasure, work, do in fact help to provide meaning, so long as they are properly grounded in God's grace and are humbly accepted as his gifts to us. So these verses at the end of chapter 2 are actually kind of the first of what are known as carpe diem passages in Ecclesiastes. I think there's about 6 or 7 of them. And carpe diem, of course, Latin phrase meaning seize the day. These passages emphasize the necessity of finding contentment and appreciation in the gifts that God has given to us. These same things that did not provide greater meaning in and of themselves are infused with meaning by the one who gives them. And so we, in turn, are to accept them with humility and thanksgiving. And this is not just in Ecclesiastes thing. It's not just the teacher who holds this opinion. We can see this echoed even in the New Testament. If you go to the book of 1 Timothy 4, verse 4, everything God created is good. Nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving. 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 through 8. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. We are no longer simply considering how things are under the sun at this point, or from just a more worldly point of view. Right now, here in verses 24 through 26, we are seeing things from a more heavenly viewpoint, a more heavenly focus. I wanted to include this quote here. This is the late British scholar Michael Eaton, one of the commentaries that I use for here. I think he summed it up quite nicely, this passage in his commentary. Here then is the antithesis of secular pessimism. The preacher has held before his readers two ways of life: the vicious circle of a pointless world, temporary pleasures, fruitless work, futile wisdom, inevitable death, versus an enjoyable life taken daily from the hand of God, in the assurance of faith that he deals appropriately with the righteous and the unrighteous. And so we come to a close this morning. As we come to a close this morning, I'd like to fast forward a bit from chapters 1 and 2 to the end of the book, to the other part of that framework that I was talking about, to a very surely familiar verse to help conclude my thoughts here this morning. There in chapter 12, I believe verse 13. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And if we want to truly find ultimate meaning, then it's right there. In awe and reverence towards God that manifests itself in righteous living. All of the wisdom, all of the pleasure, all of the toil in this world means nothing outside of that context. Along with that passage, though, I'd like to point to another passage in the New Testament, this one from the Gospel of John. In the 6th chapter, after Jesus miraculously feeds the 5,000, he's speaking to the crowds, and they have this exchange, starting in verse 27. He says, "Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God has placed his seal of approval." So then they asked him, "What must we do to do the work God requires?" Jesus answered, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." So in a world that is heaven, that is meaningless or absurd, whichever gloss you want to give that word, where so much ultimately has no lasting meaning, and where in a world where what ought to be and what is are often so far apart that to call it absurd might even be a grave understatement. In that kind of a world, along comes Jesus to proclaim that he is the one who will make sense of all of that, out of all of that nonsense. In a world where nothing ever seems to change, where there is nothing new under the sun, along comes Jesus to proclaim that he will make all things new. Our duty is to fear God and keep his commandments. And along comes Jesus to proclaim that the most important, the most meaningful thing we can do, the most important commandment to keep, is to have faith, to put our hope and our trust in him and believe in him. That is the good news that Jesus brings to a world that is so starving for meaning and purpose. He himself is that meaning and purpose. He infuses everything around us with life and significance. All of it testifies to his greatness and helps point us beyond our own selfish tendencies to the one who is worthy of glory and praise. We are sinners who struggle along in a world that is in so many ways hostile to the well-being of our hearts and our minds and our souls. Yet God has not left us without hope. Instead, just like he has given us so many gifts in life, just like he gave us pleasures, and wisdom, and work. He's given us the ultimate gift of His Son, who not only has shown us how to live meaningful and purpose-filled lives, but who helped deliver us from the futility of this life by dying on a cross for our sins, to be an atoning sacrifice, to do what we could not do for ourselves. And so where are we going to look for meaning and purpose in an increasingly absurd and chaotic world? Are we going to look inward to our own desires and our own whims? Are we going to cling to our worldly possessions or our worldly wisdom or our work and labor, trusting in those things for our meaning, trusting in those things for our identity, trusting in those things to save us? Or are we going to entrust ourselves to our God, who is faithful to His promises, and to our Savior, Jesus Christ, who has given meaning to our lives by giving up His own? In a world that is so marred by guilt and sin and death, it's so comforting to know that God's grace and mercy are so abundant and so readily available to anyone and everyone who would believe. And so this morning we would offer that invitation to come forward, to put your faith in Jesus Christ, to be washed in the waters of baptism, to be raised a new creation. We would also offer the invitation for those faithful Christians who are struggling along the journey. Perhaps the way currently feels fraught with peril. Maybe things seem meaningless at times. Maybe the world seems like heaven to you. Life is sometimes hard to make sense of. We're not immune from difficulties in this life, any of us. If that is the case, we would encourage you to come and let us help you carry those burdens. That is what we do as a family. Whatever your need may be this morning, we'd ask that you would come and make it known. Together we stand and sing.